We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 19th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
ملت ایران در مقابل جنگ تحمیلی.
Iran's supreme leader pledges to stand firm as his country and Israel continue strikes against each other. We'll hear from those who fear Tehran will become the next Gaza. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, seismic shifts in the media as Netflix and TF1 team up to target the mainstream, and why Vice may be the next shortcut channel on your TV remote. Plus,
the thing with the president is he's not conventional, but everyone seeks to analyse him on the basis that he should be.
Australia's former Prime Minister examines whether the US is still a reliable security partner for Australia. We'll be in Florence as Petit Uomo is in full swing, with Italian menswear on the up like never before. Plus the latest headlines in architecture and the newspapers too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. It's understood that the foreign ministers of Germany, France and Great Britain could meet their Iranian counterpart in Geneva later today. Thailand's government is reportedly on the verge of collapse after the second largest party in the country's coalition withdrew its support. And Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo say they've reached an agreement to end 32 years of fighting. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, Iran does not want the US to get involved in its conflict with Israel. The country's supreme leader has warned of chaos if America joins in with Israel's strikes against the country. And Iran's diplomatic mission to the United Nations in New York has hit back at Donald Trump's claims that Iranian negotiators want to talk to him. For those on the ground, however, in Iran, there are choices to be made. Residents in the capital, Tehran, face a long and painful exodus if they choose to leave, or a decision to stay and face the repeated Israeli strikes. And all this is happening in a country with deep internal divisions. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now from Istanbul by Tara Kangalu, who's a global affairs journalist for NBC, CNN and Al Jazeera America. She's also adjunct professor at Georgetown University and the author of The Heartbeat of Iran. A very good morning to you, Tara.
Good morning to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you with us. Just explain to us a little bit about what is happening inside Iran in terms of a sentiment. I mean, is it possible at the moment to be supportive of Iran as a country and its integrity, yet at the same time be aware of the deep resentment that many hold towards the government?
Thank you so much for bringing up that nuance, something that is not clarified as much in the coverage for our global audience. There was a very poignant cartoon that I saw last night. One eye was crying, having people hit by missiles. The other eye looked happy, jubilant, because the mullahs, the clerics, the regime insiders were hit. And that is the sentiment. There's this duality of emotions in Iran. On one hand, you have a nation of 90 million who for the last 45 years have been choked, stifled, and brutally killed in so many instances whenever they came on the streets, risked their lives to tell the world and also their own government that we are angry at you. We don't want you. We want to bring change. But nothing came of that. And on the other hand, these people are being killed by Israeli strikes overnight. continuous drone attacks were taking place all over Tehran. I woke up checking my phone to see if internet connections have, gone up and reconnected in Tehran to see if I can get news. Some people were able to get through, but some couldn't. So we have a country of 90 million, an extremely educated, vibrant, sophisticated society that, quite frankly, is caught between the lunacy of a theocracy and the aggression of one of the greatest militaries in the world, that being of the United States, combined with Israel, who is in this being aggressors for their own interests, really, not the interest of the Iranian people.
So what can the Iranian people do, given the fact that this anti-government sentiment that you describe is still so powerful and has been for several years? Yet there must be a feeling that they have to rally around Iran as a nation.
There's a sentiment in Iran rallying around the flag, not rallying around the regime. Some of the most beautiful images are also emerging out of this utter chaos in Tehran. Friends have been sending me pictures of long gasoline lines, long traffic lines in very wide roads where people are trying to flee Tehran to north, elsewhere. To be away really as much as they can, which by the way is quite hard. But people were passing fruits and juices and pastries. So this sense of camaraderie, this sense of unity is there among people. But quite frankly, what can they do? Nothing. For the longest time, like I said, they risked their lives coming on the street protesting. And as I have been told over and over and over again this past week by people in Iran, we were abandoned. That's the sentiment. We were abandoned then, and we are abandoned now. Emma, today, some of Iran's brightest and most courageous are in prisons. They've been arrested. Thinkers, artists, rights activists, lawyers, educators, journalists, professors, people who can be change makers in Iran's future. These are women and men who represent what Iran really is, what a free Iran could be. Okay. Some people think, Iranian people should be empowered or given the tools. No, Iranian people have the power. It's just they need not to have the power not stolen from them by their own regime, or quite frankly, be bombed by Israel or United States joining Israel's military effort, or be meddled in their affairs by foreign aggressors.
And this issue of the foreign aggressors is not only the Israeli strikes, but also we've had news overnight breaking that Donald Trump has reported agreed upon a plan of attack against Iran. He's met his National Security Council again, although it's understood that he's waiting to see if Tehran abandons its nuclear plan. What effect does that have in Iran, given the fact that there is absolutely no way that the Iranians wish the Americans to start getting involved in attacks, yet at the same time this plays directly into the authorities' hands?
Yes, and I would take that a step further. Israel is attacking Iran with U.S. weaponry. Just a day after the first round of attacks last Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump came out and, very boastfully said, these are our weapons, great weapons, in his own unique words that he often uses. So this is an indirect war with the United States. They are involved. Yesterday also, President Donald Trump, or actually the night before, he said, we have control over Tehran's airspace. And by we, he meant the United States and Israel. Now, I think, of course, like I said, the greatest military in the world, if they start directly now attacking, all bets are off. Iran can become the next Gaza, Lebanon, again, emphasizing on how vast it is. But because of the military might of the United States, it would be a catastrophe. Once again, innocent Iranians bearing the brunt, because the regime people, they all have their plan B. They've stashed their money outside of Iran. They can flee. Fundamentally, it's the people, civilians in Iran, and also Israel, I will say, who will bear the brunt. Finally, though, I will say what can end this would be Donald Trump's decision-making and how he promised the American people. He promised on this grand image that he portrayed of his administration not entering any foreign wars, not entertaining America's forever wars. He promised that. And now he's not delivering on that promise. And I think that is a huge issue domestically in the United States with his MAGA base. And quite frankly, right at this minute when we're talking, I don't think the Senate and Congress know how to deal with him. So really, it's a wait and see game. And everything depends on U.S. President Donald Trump and his decision, because the Iranians, that being the regime, by the way, not the people, are continuing in their suicidal mission of aggression and attacks and retaliation.
Indeed, Tara, there's an article in the New York Times this morning, which it's an opinion piece by Elizabeth Bumiller, and she talks about the fact of Trump, Iran, and the spectre of Iraq. We bought all the happy talk. It talks about how this pondering of swift military action that 22 years ago, it looks like a playbook that's repeating itself. For Iran or for Iranians to look at the prospect of those kind of narratives emerging, fears that Tehran could be the next Gaza. What do you do if you're Iranian at that stage?
To be reminded that we asked the world to help us, to be with us for years, and they were silent. And now we are at this terrifying last scene. And really, I think that's the sentiment among Iranians. They feel helpless because their willpower has been robbed from them by their own regime and the foreign aggressors, and that is dangerous. I absolutely agree with that sentiment. The United States went into Iraq under the premise that Saddam Hussein, again a dictator, there's no argument in that, okay, has weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And that was a huge failure on the journalism community and the media's push, really, to beat the drums of war. And we're seeing that right now. Rafael Grossi, head of IAEA, has been making the rounds since yesterday. And he's saying that we cannot confirm that Iran was making a nuclear bomb. The United States intelligence itself is negating Iran's ability from making an imminent bomb. And the only reason, this is so important for listeners, the only reason Iran continued enriching uranium and continued with its nuclear program was because Donald Trump pulled out unilaterally from a nuclear deal. And they said, you know what? You break a deal, we're going to, do what we want.
We'll have to leave it there. My apologies. Tara Kangalu, global affairs journalist for NBC, CNN and Al Jazeera America. Thank you so much for joining us on the line from Istanbul. You're listening to The Globalist. It's 8:13 a.m. in Paris, 7:13 a.m. here in London. Now, there are huge changes afoot in the media as the old guard recognises the new and the new seeks help from known names. In France, TV fans will soon be able to watch TF1 on a new platform, Netflix. Meanwhile, a long-time NBC Universal marketing executive, Adam Stotsky, is taking over as chief executive of Vice Media in the United States with the purpose of shoring up the firm's studio and advertising. Well, to try and cast a little bit more of a context onto the landscape, I'm joined now by Scott Bryan, TV critic and media contributor for Monocle, The Guardian and The New York Times. A very good morning to you, Scott. Good to have you.
Morning.
So just explain to us the TF1 and the Netflix agreement. How did this come about and what will it look like to us?
Yeah, so it was reported by the Financial Times yesterday. And essentially what it will be is that when you go onto Netflix in France, you'll be able to see programs from TF1 available to go and watch on there. Now, that might not seem new at a first glance. If you go onto Netflix in many countries, you'll see maybe older programs from a broadcaster available to go and watch, from the likes of the BBC, from rivals such as CBS or even Disney. But the thing that is key is that they're actually going to be showing the linear channels as well. So essentially, you'll be able to, instead of just scrolling through for TV channels, you'll be able to go onto Netflix to actually see a linear channels from essentially a rival on that service. And I think it's rather interesting because until now, I think linear TV channels, quite rightly, have been rather hesitant to be sort of essentially giving their linear content onto a rival streaming platform, just because these streaming platforms have been gaining a lot of subscribers, whereas linear traditional TV has been generally falling as many of us turn to streaming services, but also catch up with content on demand. So I think essentially, if this seems to work in France, I think it could potentially, affect the way that we watch Netflix and watch content in many other countries.
I mean, we're talking about a minor inconvenience on your sofa, aren't we? That you have to flick between the streaming services and then you have to go and find the channels. Is this now a recognition by the likes of TF1, as you mentioned, that those days of us having the patience to switch across are going, and that the idea of linear channels is fading somewhat?
I mean, I think linear TV will certainly always have a place when it comes to live events and sports, but it is clear that in many countries it is on a downward trajectory. So I would think that, they are all sort of working out how to sort of maintain a relevancy at a time when streaming services have much deeper pockets than they do. However, I do think there maintains quite a bit of skepticism of therefore going, OK, let's just give all of our content to a streaming service, because it's not really an equal playing field anymore. Whilst for the viewers, it can be sort of much more, it could be much more much more of a benefit to be essentially only using one app than having to scroll through endless apps to try to find content to watch. For linear broadcasters, it essentially means that they're sort of playing second fiddle. Netflix at a whim can decide to change the algorithm so their shows are not as prominent. They can kind of maybe push the channels, not necessarily now, but at a later date out of the way. There isn't so much of an equal parity. And I think what you've been having in the UK are the likes of the BBC really pushing the regulator Ofcom to ensure that on all TV sets in the future, you have Netflix being as prominent as linear TV broadcasters, because they fear that if you give streaming services too much power, then they might not necessarily be thinking of the other parts of the ecosystem, which have been so harmonious for so many years.
How does this work? I mean, you mentioned the United Kingdom, but let's consider globally the role of a public broadcaster. I mean, TF1 is a private company and can enter into a private deal with Netflix. But if you are a state broadcaster, what do you do when private companies are looking to be the future of your broadcasting platform?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because there are concerns around whether streaming services would be able to have the same range of programming as a public channel would. I mean, just primarily, if you look at public service broadcasting in many countries, they have a sort of clear remit around education as much as entertainment, whilst Netflix may be interested in documentaries, but also don't really have to. So I think there's a sort of a very much a focus on whether the new entrants into the market are able to fit that criteria. I think it's also for a sort of public company such as TF1, there's questions around whether it would be able to work in the long term, whether this is the start of a long-term strategic things, a plan for their business. I think what is sort of clear to me sort of going forward is, whether this sort of strategy is going to work. Because I think that having so many different shows on so many different platforms can be sort of very beneficiary for a sort of old traditional broadcaster. The likes of YouTube, for example, are also doing deals with public service broadcasting, in which their programs are available on each service. They may maybe sort of share a bit of the advertising revenue. But a challenge would be, it's essentially, what if in 5 years' time Netflix goes, oh, this is not really working for us, we're going to change that strategy. That could essentially leave public service broadcasters out in the cold. I think there needs to be sort of, it is becoming harder and harder, I think, for public service broadcasters to essentially be sustaining an existing linear business model, along with trying to work with new streaming partners, along with trying to sort of work with our changing viewing habits, all at the same time on very limited resources.
Well, let's bring in the NBC Vice story at this point. That we have Adam Stotsky, a former Universal marketing executive, now taking over as chief executive of Vice. Vice has had its fair share of problems, starting off as a renegade voice, an attractive, exciting company, but it filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. What role does NBC now play in Vice?
Well, I think NBC sort of are very keen on essentially trying to move with the times. I think Vice has been very much, even though it has been not necessarily always successful in terms of being a sustainable business, what it has done is been able to attract a lot of younger viewers or younger consumers who may not be interested in the likes of existing networks such as NBC. So I can see it working potentially in that point of view, why NBC is keen on why Adam Stotsky has been brought in. I think a challenge, and this is a challenge facing a lot of sort of digital media darlings like Vice and BuzzFeed, is that essentially about a decade ago they were seen to be the future, and loads of billions of pounds and billions of dollars were put into these businesses, thinking that they could be the new CNN, only for the growth to not really turn up, for the digital billions never to really become sustainable forms of advertising and revenue. So a lot of these companies ended up shedding a lot of staff very quickly. Vice was pretty much gutted, and now they're sort of starting again. And whilst there have been reports, I think one in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, to say that Vice is now profitable, albeit I would reckon with a far fewer staff, I think it's also having to change now with viewing habits, and the fact that maybe sort of 10 years ago, we would all go onto these websites as a matter of our routine. These days, we tend to directly sort of find a lot of our news and information from social media, and not really leaving the likes of platforms such as X, platforms such as TikTok. So it's all the more harder, I think, for these businesses to stand out when you're potentially competing with hundreds of thousands of different outlets, and especially influencers and individuals. So Adam's sort of got a key ambition of sort of building up new programming, new slates, new provocative documentaries under the whole Vice banner. But I guess a challenge is, would that be enough to stand out, particularly that to a certain proportion of the audience, these sort of brands maybe could be considered to be old hats now.
Scott, Brian, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. That's a TV critic and media contributor for Monocle there. Still to come in today's programme, well, here's a welcome presence in the studio to talk about the latest edition of Monocle magazine. Introduce yourself, please, sir.
Thank you, Emma. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco, and today I'll be talking about Monocle's brand new issue, our quality of life issue, plus summer music recommendations and our favourite kiosks.
Thank you, Faye. You're listening to The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS. Banking is our craft.
We continue now with a look at today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Zoe Grunewald, Westminster editor at The Lead. Very good morning to you, Zoe.
Good morning.
How's life? All good?
All good, thank you.
Everybody's still going bananas in Parliament, or are they looking at the sun and deciding that they actually don't want to do any work?
Everyone's going bananas, as you suspect.
Excellent. Yeah. Glad to hear it. Well, carry on covering the bananas. In the meantime, let's shift our attention to Spain, where the government there is going bananas. Tell us what's happening there.
Yes, so as we will all remember, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, Spain and Portugal had a big row over their energy sector because there was this dramatic blackout that wiped out about 60% of their electricity supply in around 5 seconds. And it sparked a blame game between governments and institutions, National Grid, private energy companies, but also actually commentators who were trying to decide what the cause was. And it started this suggestion that maybe, in some ways, the green transition and Spain and Portugal's reliance on green energy was to blame. Well, today, the Energy Secretary has said that actually this is to do with companies not taking enough responsibility for making sure that voltage was stable, for sharing vital data, and the grid operator said companies failed in their duties here. So critics were questioning the country's reliance on renewables, but the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has now dismissed that idea and says that there are serious weaknesses in the grid and they need fixes from these private companies.
And the difficulty that we now face is that once we've ruled out, or experts at least have ruled out a cyber attack, but when you have such an enormous problem face at least one, if not two nations, there is always that idea of who's to blame, which can actually take a bit too much energy out of the problem solving.
That's correct. And obviously net zero and the transition has become highly politicised, and Spain and Portugal are very defensive of their, just weeks before this happened, they were celebrating the fact that they had such a huge reliance on renewables. So you can see why this would be quite politically contentious. It was also a huge cost to the economies and obviously to people's daily lives. But I think in order to figure out what went wrong and stop it from happening, there does need to be figuring out who is responsible. And obviously in Spain and Portugal, some of the infrastructure is privately owned, some is publicly owned. So that makes figuring out where the blame is that bit harder.
Let's move to a really good article in the Telegraph today. Yesterday, there was an enormous court appearance at Westminster Magistrates for the singer from Kneecap, a Northern Irish band who have got themselves in an awful lot of trouble for either accidentally or intentionally speaking out against Israel. This has sparked off a big debate about actually the ability for musicians to speak out, not least because of freedom of speech, but it has also caused practical problems for them travelling. And there's this great article in the Telegraph where an unnamed British pop star speaks out against the US president in an interview, and then the manager rings the journalist and says, actually, can we not talk about that, because can we take that out of the interview because that might actually cause problems for them travelling?
Yes, that's right. So we know that across the world there have been, pretty much since COVID, but also things like Brexit as well, there have been difficulties for creatives, celebrities, whatever however you want to term them, who rely on visas and travelling in order to sell their craft, in order to tour or whatever it is. But particularly there is now concerns about getting into the US. As you say, they talk about this particular celebrity who spoke about Trump in an interview, and the manager, who they say previously is a manager who doesn't really care about these kind of things, contacted the journalist and said, please, that should be retracted. And there's just this feeling that actually already visas for getting into the US were getting prohibitively high in the sort of thousands of pounds, thousands of dollars. But there's also issues with red tape. And now this is compounded by this paranoia about the Trump presidency and about the Trump regime being extra stringent on visas and entry requirements for the country. So we know about academics, for example, who've had their laptops seized or have had their social media platforms trawled through and have been denied access or have been detained at the US border. And obviously, if you are a creative who is outspoken, politically engaged, the worry about not being able to access the US market might outweigh your, desire to be political in this context. So it's worrying quite a lot of actors, quite a lot of musicians. And then, of course, Kneecap is the much more kind of severe end of that, where they have been very, very political. That's part of their art. But is that going to stop them from being able to tour?
Indeed. And we've seen news breaking overnight from the United States that students in international students will now apply to go to US universities, but their social media will be scrutinised. So there'll be lots of cleaning being done at the moment. Let's move finally to a story in The Guardian. Britons have just 23 hours of genuinely free time a week. So much for labour-saving technology. What do we actually mean by free time? There's that idea that free time is actually when you put your device down and go off and do stuff? Or is it that moment when you can actually just sit and fall into an almost Google hole or scroll until you pass out? Yeah, so
this is a recent research from Lloyds Bank that said we have about 23 hours of genuinely free time a week. And this is where you've got freedom, to do your own things, to go about your life. And actually, when you think about the fact that we should have, there are 168 hours that we should be able to access, and 86% of respondents said they needed more. There is this real feeling that people are very time poor. The average Briton is very time poor. And this particular piece makes the point that actually, we talk a lot about technology, and there was this dream once that technology would free us up, that we'd have a 6-hour working week, that all these technologies would be seized by the worker and make life better for us. But actually, they've always been seized by the business owner as a means of extracting more profit. So more machines means that you can get actually more out of your employees, but you're not giving them any time back. And this writer's basically making the point that can't we start to see that technologies could really give us some free time? Can't we democratise, the profits from this, shift the locus of life and meaning away from work, and create a society that's focused more around restructure and connection? Because actually, in the past, when workers have tried to do this, they've always then said, actually, if we use this technology, maybe we can get more hours out of our work, maybe we can make more money, rather than seeing the value of actually free time.
Zoe Grunewald, Westminster editor at The Lead. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:30 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. Let's have a look at some of the other headlines we're following today. President Trump has reportedly agreed upon a plan of attack against Iran after meeting his National Security Council again. However, it's understood that he's waiting to see if Tehran abandons its nuclear plan. Diplomatic channels, meanwhile, are still reportedly open to Iran. It's understood that the foreign ministers of Germany, France and Great Britain could meet their Iranian counterpart in Geneva later today. Thailand's government is reportedly on the verge of collapse after the second largest party in the country's coalition withdrew its support. It follows a leaked call held between the country's Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra and the former leader of Cambodia, Hun Sen. And Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo say they've reached an agreement to end 32 years of fighting. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now a look at some of the headlines we're following here at Midori House. Finbar Tersland is an international correspondent whose work has appeared in the likes of NBC News, Reuters and Vice. Well, here he explores how Ukrainians are dancing in the face of danger. His words are read for us today by Monocle's Monica Lillis.
Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Kyiv was fast becoming Eastern Europe's hedonism hotspot. Wartime Ukraine's nightlife, however, has far from disappeared and has even evolved to meet the moment with aplomb. The techno festivals and all-night raves may be gone, but they've been replaced by a rich scene of day parties and evening gigs that frequently double as fundraisers for those fighting on the front line. Legendary Kyiv nightclub K41, designed by the architects behind Berlin's Berghain and housed in a former brewery, has raised more than €700,000 to fund the purchase of everything from energy generators to bulletproof vests for the army. In the Black Sea resort city of Odessa, sometimes dubbed the Ibiza of the East, Ukrainians continue to party at the bars and clubs that line the seaside, even as drones hover overhead and missiles pummel the surrounding oblast. In a time of blackouts, bombardments and daily uncertainty, the partygoers cutting shapes on the country's dance floors demonstrate how Ukrainians have refused to be flattened by a narrative of war and still know how to have a good time. For both civilians and soldiers on leave, these venues provide otherwise hard-to-come-by opportunities for conviviality and kicking back. Dancing the night or afternoon away in a nation at war promises fleeting moments of respite and an all-important morale boost.
And my thanks to Finbar Tersland there, and his words were read for us today by Monocle's Monica Lillis. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter. It's called the Monocle Minute, and you can find it at monocle.com/minute. We head now to the Ukrainian port city of Odessa. Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller sat down with the Australian former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. And Andrew began by asking him whether, given the mixed signals sent to Europe this year, the US is still a reliable security partner for Australia.
No, I don't. And as I said, I don't think the actions and decisions in Europe, it would be wrong to interpret them in that way. This is a rebalancing. You've got to remember that it was the Americans who were there even before the war began. It was the transfer of arms and the javelins and so on. The assumption of an ongoing disproportionate burden shared and carried by the United States, I don't think is a sustainable one. I mean, to expect that a burden sharing that was based on what happened post-Second World War would continue for 70 years and into infinity, I don't think is reasonable.
But you don't have any concerns that the United States might start to one day turn around and regard Australia and New Zealand and go, why is any of this our problem? Because that's a security relationship that has, well, it's existed since John Curtin made his speech about, without regard to any ties to the United Kingdom, Australia looks to the United States, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, the phrase I used to use was Australia may look to the United States, but we don't leave it to the United States. And I think that's been true by our actions, and it must continue to be true of our future. So, no, I'm not concerned, because the overlap of interests in the Indo-Pacific is what there is the underlying, if you like, moral relationship, which is incredibly close and is deeply felt in the United States, deeply felt across every arm of government, both Congress and in the executive. So there's that. But there is also, what is our biggest threat? It's China. And that is their biggest threat, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but globally. And so we have a complete overlapping of our interests. It does mean that that very strong threat that is posed by China to the US directly means that we also need to be able to deal with if there's a pressing that sort of goes right out across the Pacific in the same one sweeping action. Well, the Americans will need to be looking after their approaches, and we would have to look after ours. But that would be in total concert. And it's not just us, it's Japan, it's Korea, it's Singapore, it's many other countries. But what ultimately will drive the US is their interests, and theirs and ours, particularly when it relates to China and the Taiwan Straits, is fairly obvious.
I do want to ask as well, because I know this is a question preoccupying leaders all over the world, how one judges, measures, anticipates the moods of the current President of the United States, who you always seem to get on reasonably well with. I know you were a New Year's Eve guest at Mar-a-Lago. Is there any counsel you would pass on about how to deal with a man who does seem to take more or less everything personally?
Well, I don't know if I'd form that conclusion for a start. The thing with the president is he's not conventional.
Clearly.
Yeah, but everyone seeks to analyse him on the basis that he should be. And that, I think, totally undermines their ability to comprehend what he's doing. They become so distracted by his method that they miss the point of the goal. And it's been mentioned several times here at this event. The suggestion that the US might have left NATO during his first term, appalling, abysmal, an isolationist act an act of great, surrender. No, he was ensuring he got to increase financial support for defence from all NATO countries. He's far more pragmatic. Yes, he's transactional, there's no doubt about that, but that doesn't mean he likes bad deals. Just ask the North Koreans. He refused to do that deal because it wasn't a good deal. I'm sure if he could have got a good one, he would have done it. And I commend him for trying, but he exhausted that process completely and formed the judgment right there in the room that this was not a good deal. And this is why when I think of what's occurring in Ukraine, he'll want a good deal.
That was the former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison in conversation with Monocle's Andrew Muller in the Ukrainian port city of Odessa. You're listening to Monocle Radio. It is 8:39 a.m. in Copenhagen, which is where we head now for a design and fashion roundup. Grace Charlton is Monocle's Associate Design and Fashion Editor, joining us now from Denmark. But Grace, you've been on your travels quite wildly, haven't you? So just tell us where you are today. Good morning, by the way. And good morning. And also, where have you been?
So I've just arrived to Copenhagen last night, and I had been in Florence before that for Pitti Uomo, and to get to Copenhagen was such a journey. I'll spare you the details, but rerouted flights, buses to Pisa, all of it. But I'm like thankful to be here right now.
You're actually talking to someone who's a major fan of Pisa Airport because of it's just simple, straightforward, and the way that the train goes straight to it used to go straight to the airport. It's a bit more of a fiddle now, but I apologise about the bus.
I can't believe this. Okay, that's one for another time. But really? Wow. Okay.
Okay. It may have changed since I was last there. Right. So let's talk about before you had to take the bus, what was happening in Pitti Uomo. There is just such a lovely feeling at the moment that menswear is just back with a blast.
I know, it was really fun to be there. I was there 6 months ago and I admired all the cashmeres and the coats and we talked about it. And now it was about the linen, the sunglasses, the shoes with no socks. Everyone was wearing like a little bandana around their necks. It was super cute. But yeah, I feel like menswear is getting its groove back a little bit. And Pitti Uomo is always a very big deal for the world of menswear, but there were like over 750 brands showing, and the guest of honor this year was Issey Miyake, who showed last night, and it looked like a really joyful celebration, like super colorful, the classic Issey pleats, and apparently it was inspired by the Cinque Terre, the Riviera in Italy. So really, really gorgeous.
That sounds as if it's, it's a lovely celebration, and to have Issey Miyake as a sort of a guest of honor is a sign really that there is a kind of heritage and an old school element to Pitti Uomo. We've heard criticisms in the last couple of years that it is an event now absolutely dominated by influencers, and that the buying power or the buying energy isn't quite there yet, but back yet. Are we sensing change this time around?
Yeah, I think it is still like a massive business event. The influencers are still there, but I'm not going to lie, I find them quite entertaining. I don't want them to leave. But no, people were saying that it's really, they have to go to Pitti to show that they're an established brand and to get orders in and, expand internationally. This year, there was a lot of anxiety about the US and tariffs and whatnot. So, it wasn't as optimistic as 6 months ago even. So there was a sense of caution, but still, hopefully.
Okay. Well, you then, I don't know how you packed for boiling hot Florence to slightly cooler Copenhagen, but that's where we find you now. And you're doing 3 days of design. So focus from fashion to the creative arts of a different nature. We've spoken to Nick Moniz, who seemed really excited about being back in Copenhagen again, because, again, like Florence and its love of fashion and menswear and tailoring, Copenhagen and Denmark does design like no one else. It's in its DNA.
Yeah, and it really is. Every year, 3 days of design just gets bigger and better and more people are interested. Nick Moniz is super happy to be here. It's quite funny when we went to a few parties last night. I think what 3 days is doing particularly well is really just showcasing design within the lifestyle bracket of it, which is, lifestyle is such an annoying word, but it's true. like they're just really good at staging a cute little pop-up in a restaurant and inviting everyone over, and you use like cute cutlery to have delicious food. It's straightforward and it's just really fun.
And that lifestyle element, I mean, it is such a difficult word to unpack.
Yeah.
And cute cutlery sort of gets you halfway there. But that idea of embracing lifestyle, I mean, how much of a driving element is that now in design?
Massive. And like, I've noticed everyone here this year, they're doing a cafe pop-up. Yeah, it's like everyone's talking about the food element. They've got Noma projects. I mean, Copenhagen has such an amazing food heritage. And then now we're seeing fashion start to creep into the Danish design world, which I wasn't sure I'd ever see the day. You know, this phenomenon has been happening in Milan where Louis Vuitton and Hermes and everyone like shows up and throws a big party. But in Copenhagen, it had been very siloed up until now. But I've noticed a few people are sort of, like New Balance are throwing a big party. Stina Goya, which is a Copenhagen brand, they're doing a collab on a chair. So Cecily Banson is doing a workshop. So it's quite interesting to see how maybe 3 days is growing despite itself. I don't think it really wants to be too big, but it's just too good at what it does. So it's very, very popular.
Grace Charlton reporting from Copenhagen, wishing you a good day today. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
Now we travel from Copenhagen back here to London for more news from the design world with some architecture thrown into the mix. I'm delighted to say Tim Abrams, contributing editor to the Architectural Record, joins me on the line. A very good morning to you, Tim. How are you?
Good morning, Emma. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And very much looking forward to the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition here in London. It's an institution which we adore, but it is slightly beleaguered at the moment, and it's trying to sort of keep its chin up, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's been held every year since 1769. So the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition has gone through some ups and downs. But yes, the institution itself, the Royal Academy, has had some post-COVID woes. And the Summer Exhibition is a sense of a regathering of the troops, a reconsideration of its values, and onwards into the future. It's a fantastic show. I love it. I love the summer exhibition.
And normally the Royal Academy, for those who are not massively au fait with it, has been the great training ground of the great British artists for hundreds upon hundreds of years, which obviously has this tradition, but it also has this brilliant ability to kind of create art in real time. This year, however, it's doing architecture more than art, isn't it? Which obviously is delightful for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it always has an architectural component. There has been, from 1811, the architectural drawings were shown as part of the show, but it was kind of shunted aside in the library. And there was then, after, from 1931, there was a dedicated architecture gallery. And it's always had architecture there. And there is a kind of, the architecture always sits slightly strangely within the great kind of the pantheon that the Royal Academy is for British art. But this year, Farshid Musavi, who's the first British architect to curate the exhibition since 2013, when Eva Yurikna curated it, she has placed, rather than having a separate show, she's put the architecture within all the art. And so you see the work of architects like Norman Foster. There you go, straight in. There's his new design for the Manchester United new Old Trafford Stadium there, sitting within the artworks. And this just bumps up the art of the architecture, gives it a sense of worth in and of its own right. The model making, the craft making, the design, the beauty of the actual works which are created even before any bricks hit the ground. So you have this sense of architecture as a creative craft and artwork. So it's a beautiful way to show it and to to promote architecture, I would say.
You've all persuaded us. Let's talk about, let's head to Egypt and the Grand Egyptian Museum. It's been postponed, and it's not necessarily, it should be the absolute jewel in Egyptian museum's crown, given the fact that Egypt has an awful lot of very good stuff to show the rest of the world. But no one's quite happy with it yet. What's the problem?
Well, there is a lot of, obviously, geopolitics comes into play. There's the war in Sudan, there's what's happening on the border with Gaza. There is a sense of Egypt being amongst a large a kind of number of problems, which means that it doesn't feel, the nation doesn't feel ready yet to open the Egyptian Museum. But it's been over 20 years since the Hennigan Pen, an Irish practice, won the competition to design it in the modernist idiom. And I think that this kind of shows the slightly strange relationship that the Grand Egyptian Museum has to Egypt, in the sense that although there are these kind of geopolitical issues happening on its doorstep, why can't it just open just for the sake of its local people? Whereas in actual fact, the Grand Egyptian Museum is intended for an international audience. The Prime Minister said, in light of current regional developments, the Tourism and Antiquities Ministry has decided to announce in due course another opening date, which means that you get the sense that this is for someone else, for the tourism world. And when the region is unstable, that tourism world is not comfortable and not confident in coming to the museum. So they're waiting until an optimum moment.
Let's move on to another argument, another problem for a big name. Design Miami Basel. That arrived a little while ago, and everyone scratched their heads as to what that meant. But it's come to an end of its life.
Yeah, Design Miami, it was always a slightly geographical scratch of the head, Design Miami Basel. But Design Miami was set up by Craig Robin, an estate developer and design collector in Miami. And very early, he wanted to establish a relationship with a European base. And Art Basel, the largest art fair in Europe, was seen to be the correct place. It is interesting, though, as the years have gone by, it's really clear where the real power in design collection is, and that's very much in Paris. And Paris is where Design Miami has opened in 2023, and that having been a success, now the Basel wing is closing down. But there is a sense that an actual fact, Art Basel still has something to give because of the new organisation has come in. Maze Design Basel. Maze are an organiser of luxury fairs across Europe. So they've stepped in and they've created an alternative, Maze Design Basel. But tellingly, it's a group of French galleries. So to be honest, the French galleries, for the non-purchasing observer like me, I don't really have enough money to drop on a Charlotte Perriand sofa, but that was always, the French galleries were always the star show. They were always the place that really showed off design pieces, the things to sit on whilst you're looking at your new piece of contemporary art. This was the real place to go to buy them. So to see them continuing, galleries like Creo, who just put on great shows, collect great design, to see them still in Design Basel, to see them still in Basel is really reassuring and a really important addition to the Art Basel Fair.
Tim Abrams, thank you so much for explaining all that to us. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. I've just got my hands on the latest edition of Monocle magazine. It's really not bad at all. To help us explain on radio the joys of print, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent, is here to talk about, well, Fate, this is the quality of life issue, isn't it? Now, I'm not going to say a word about who's won.
It is my favourite issue of the year, I have to say.
It's fun, isn't it? Why is it that we all get so desperately excited about this one?
You know, I think Monocle has always, from its beginning in 2007, always spoke about cities and quality of life. I think that's such an important theme for us. Look at our very successful podcast, The Urbanist, which talks about city, about quality of life in cities. And I have to say, every year we had the top 20 most livable cities around the world. But our ranking, I think, was more fun than perhaps the other ones because we added number of cinemas. Can you have a drink post 11 p.m., for example? But I have to say, Emma, this year people are in for a surprise because it's not your traditional ranking of 20 cities, but basically there are 10 cities and every city kind of has a different vibe. They're the best all-rounder, the best city for housing. And I like that because, you know, it's not without its controversies, a list like this, right? Because how can you measure a city? So I think Monocle editors, you know, they were kind of thinking, how can they kind of remake that ranking? But it's still very much a global quality of life survey.
And there is that acceptance, isn't it? That when we all talk about where we live in an international ranking, you know, someone in Rome will say, you know, we'd be very jealous of someone who lives in Rome, and they'll say, yeah, but it's chaos. And say, yeah, but everything else is great. Or if you look at Paris, and people might have a few comments to make about people who live there, for example, or whatever. But no one ever has the perfect place, do they?
No, that's impossible. And you did say the word Paris, so I'm not going to review all the winners, but if you subscribe to the Monocle Minute, you can see that Paris won the best all-rounder. And you know what? I couldn't agree more. I think you and me, Emma, we're big fans of the city. And I think Paris, there's a little bit for everyone. For me, what attracts me to Paris is culture. I think it's fantastic, the number of independent cinemas, independent bookshops. I feel very inspired when I go there. But I think I'm pretty sure your Paris can be different than mine.
Paris, you're up there in the rankings. I'm not really allowed to sort of say who else has won. You just have to buy the magazine. Simple.
You really do.
And read it. Okay, let's talk about other stuff, because we really are not going to tell you about all the other stuff in all the other quality of life cities. You really do have to buy it. Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, our culture guru here at Monocle Radio and indeed on the magazine, she's written a really lovely story about kiosks. Now, what kind of kiosks are we talking about?
The real kiosks, the ones that are in the city centre selling magazines, you know, independent titles or plenty more. So Sophie edited, so she asked some contributors around the world, including me, to write about some of those iconic kiosks around. We have News and Coffee in London, Edicolo Lambrate in Milano, and if I may, plug my own newsstand in Rio de Janeiro. Well, I'm not the owner, but it's called Banca Cinza. And it's a beautiful newsstand, like other Brazilian newsstands, but it sells independent titles. It sells very kind of local zines. And apparently you can have ice-cold beer just in front because the guy is also the owner of the bar close to it.
So while you're while you're reading your beautiful magazine and drinking your ice-cold beer, you need to be listening to stuff as well. Now, this is when obviously you rather sort of come into your own here. Tell us about what you featured in the magazine this time around in terms of music.
Well, in terms of music, I had a lovely interview with Italian musician Giorgio Poi. He just released an album called Sheghe, and I was talking to him and I say, Giorgio, your music is very sunny. And he says that he's always been hunting for the sun, for the summer. So I picked one of the tracks from the album, which is on the Monocle Radio playlist. It's called Nelle tue piscine. Even the name is very summery. Shall we have a little taster, Emma?
Oh, go on. I quite like the idea of Nelle tue piscine. Forgive me if my Italian's not up to it, but that to me says in your swimming pools in the plural, not just one. Or that's a lot of water.
And you know what? You have to listen to my interview with Giorgio Poi, which is coming out on Monocle Radio as well, and you have to buy the magazine because there's a deep meaning to the track. Nevertheless, it is about swimming pools, and we all love a good swimming pool. And still talking about music, Emma, also if you buy the new Monocle, there's my usual summer playlist for 2025. I've picked 30 tracks this time. We have some beautiful Brazilian soul from the 70s. We have some French funk, which I'm pretty sure you love it as well. And even some German avant-garde techno from the 80s. I like variety, I like mix. I think life without a mix, it's a boring life.
You've got me. What's the German avant-garde techno?
They were a duo. They were very, very influential, and the song's called Boys. You should really, really listen to it as well.
We'll have a global countdown for this at some stage, won't we? Already exists.
On the briefing today. So that's a little taste, which is about, my maths are bad, but I would say in 4 hours from now.
It's in a while. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you so much for joining us here on The Globalist. And as Faye has just said, he will be on the briefing telling us all about the summer playlist global countdown a little later today. He'll be impressing that upon Andrew Muller, who's going to be in Zurich at a comfortable distance. Faye, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers too, Laura Kramer, Anita Riotta and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Hunter Wang. After the headlines, more music on the way. As I said, the briefing is live at midday here in London, but 1300 if you're listening in Zurich. And The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.